So, Professor Groys, thank you for an interview. I would like to ask firstly about an idea of Russia today. So, does Russia have an idea of something that would unite its population? So, is there any, and actually, is there any need of an idea, or is it enough to connect, to unite people just around a fear?
I wouldn't say that there is one such an idea. It is a capitalist country now, yeah. So people pursue their own profit and their own success, and they want to make money. It is a very atomized society, actually. Maybe the only way to build something there as an idea is nationalism, you know. It's again a capitalist mode of thinking and acting. It's a competition, yeah. Competition among individuals, but also competition among nations and states. And that's why we are living in a time of nationalisms, different kind of regionalisms and nationalisms.
So we can't say that it's something different than usual sort of traditional Western, maybe conservative ideas, yes?
Well, it is the same. It is the same as in the West and the same as in the East. Yeah, if we look at India, Japan, Korea, China, when you look at Africa, it's nationalism everywhere. It's actually nationalism was a driving force behind the dissolution of the Soviet Union. That was one of the last, let's say, empire based on some kind of internationalist abstract principles. And today, nationalism is also directed against, let's say, liberal international order. We see this conflict everywhere in Europe, but in America, but also in Asia.
To summarize this question, so how can we describe actually what is meant by Russian identity and the term or the Russian world? How can you summarize this?
It's a very strange thing because, you know, there is now very fashionable everywhere to speak about national identity, national culture identity. Mostly people speak about this identity question in the aftermath of, let's say, Islamic State and Al-Qaeda actions in the name of Islamic identity or Arab identity. And then we can speak about, of course, Islamic identity and Chinese identity, Iranian identity, Japanese identity, because all of them have some kind of non-Western layer in their culture, ancient layer, yeah? And so there is everywhere some attempts to remove everything Western, everything that was brought by the Americanization of the world, yeah? We're speaking English, yeah, also now, so it's all signs of Americanization of the world. To remove all of that and to come to some kind of, I don't know, non-Western, non-Americanized layer of your own culture, yeah, let's say. But such an operation in Russia has a long history and was never successful. Already in the 19th century, people tried to remove everything Western. At that time, it was mostly French or German. And to come to something like true Russianness, and they never succeeded. And also later nationalist movements of Slavophile talk type also never succeeded because Russia actually does not have this kind of specific non-Western layer in its culture. So to look for this layer is a very destructive strategy. It reminds me, of course, of Germany and German attempts to find in the German nation, in the German culture, something which is non-Western. We know that this tendency led to total destruction of the German culture itself in the 30s and 40s. So it's a kind of suicidal operation, I would say.
We have a rigorous conceptualization, I would say, of fascism and Nazism. Some intellectuals today rather analyze Putin's regime with, I would say, Marx and Poulantzas framework of Bonapartism, meaning under it something between military dictatorship and fascism. So how would you describe the regime in Russia today?
I wouldn't say that the current regime is a fascist regime. I wouldn't also say that it is Bonapartist because, fascism was in its own way a universalist doctrine. Germans said today Germany belongs to us and tomorrow the whole world will belong to us. Yeah. So it was a project of uniting the mankind under the German rule, and open a new era in the universal human history. Communism was also a universalist ideology. The time of this universalist ideologies is over. Obviously, Bonapartism and Napoleon was also a universalist project. Today, we have to do with regional, local projects. Actually, what is Russian world is a construction that is by definition regional. And not everywhere and not everyone belongs to the Russian world. So we have to do with defensive ideologies that already abandoned all the universalist claims and universalist aspiration. It is an ideology that wants to defend itself from the foreign influences. And this kind of ideology basically either going toward isolationism. We see it also in America with Trump and many others. So we have, in Europe, in France and in Germany, we have this kind of isolationist trend directed against all kind of universalist ideologies. And classical fascism is also a universalist ideology.
I want to talk about this Z movement, the Z that became the symbol of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. Do you see the Z movement as an indicator of a qualitative shift maybe towards totalitarianism? Because we will know that the mobilization of society in a totalitarian system occurs primarily at the level of political symbolism. Yes, we see people painting these symbols on the doors of the houses of so-called people's enemies. We see this indoctrination in offices, schools, and even kindergartens. So, can we say now that the authoritarian regime shifts to a totalitarian regime? So it loses control over violence, and the violence becomes so all-encompassing.
Well, the word totalitarian, I wouldn't apply that because it's really a characteristic for the ideologies and states of the 30s. It is an attempt to create this kind of local nationalist solidarity, but I think it's a good illustration to what I said before. It it is assumed to be a Russian movement. It is assumed to be a movement towards a Russian world. But this movement has a Latin letter, a symbol. So actually, a symbol that is taken from the West. And if you look at this text in Russian with Z, yeah, that substitute a Russian Z, then you see everywhere kind of Latinization of the Russian language. So the Russian nationalism itself looks like a form of Americanization and Latinization of the Russian world. Because when Russians look for a symbol, they take the symbol from the West. Yeah? They are incapable to give birth to this symbol from inside the Russian culture itself. So there's so to say, the symbol of a struggle against the West is itself borrowed from the West. It borrowed from the West because it's a Latin letter, but also because it is, of course, half swastika. Yeah, so it is a kind of, let's say, weakened Nazi swastika.
So I want to talk now about the idea of cleansing. Yes, I think I'm using the right term. So in an interview with Lisa Lazarson, you talk about the purge of Russia from the West that is taking place right now. So I will introduce also a second concept as well. So Putin's language actually has changed since the beginning of the war. And there is a big place for this cleanliness, yes? And we heard this ideological term, denazification of Ukraine. And this is repeated constantly, and the Ukrainian military resistance actually does not change anything in this regard. So what are we dealing with in these two cases? Because these are the very dangerous terms.
Well, this denazification, it's everything, or not everything, but most of the things are still articulated on this territory. I mean, former territory, a territory of the former East Bloc, in terms of World War II. So many movies, so many novels, and official rhetoric is very much stuck with the experience of World War II. And so if we want to say something bad about somebody, will say they are Nazis, so Russian says Ukrainians are Nazis. Ukrainians probably says Russians are Nazis. So everybody articulates their feelings and attitudes in terms of World War II. But of course, World War II is a long way ago, yeah, and it's totally irrelevant for the description of a contemporary way of living and thinking. And we are living in a very globalized, and globalized means Americanized way. Yeah, our common language is English, American English. Our means of communications are controlled by the US corporations, so including Google and all of that. So we are living in a world that has a certain shape. And what Russians now do, they try to go out of this world somehow, yeah. But this attempt to leave this world, as I said, it's not an attempt to change this world. It's not a universalist project. It's simply a project to isolate oneself from this world. It is an impossible project. It is a project that cannot succeed by definition. All the languages, including Ukrainian language and Russian language and Georgian language for that matter, they all function now as regional languages and regional culture inside some kind of lingua franca that we use in globalized world. And that is something that cannot be changed because it is, as Marx explained to us, it's simply superstructure over a certain technological base that defines our life.
Professor Groys, you often talk about the importance of visual icons. So in this case, I should mention the Bucha massacre. So because the visual icon of Russian aggression in the West became the handcuffed, shut man, it already has become a symbol of Russian aggression against Ukraine. What is the role of visual icons actually in the world today?
Yes, of course. We are confronted with some kind of images. These images are distributed all around the world. It is how we see the world. Yeah, we cannot see the world because we cannot travel a lot. And today we can travel less than ever before. Yeah. So everything that we know about the world, we know from the internet, we know from the TV. And of course, these images are very important. But on the other hand, one should not overestimate images. More important is not how images are brought to us, but how they are interpreted. How they are interpreted, by whom they are interpreted. And of course, here in the West, when we look for the images interpretation, we look at the CNN. Maybe some people look at Fox News. So think about images. It is very important to see who actually presents these images to you and how these images are commented on.
So I will say a controversial thesis now. And I think that Putin is an important part of this world, and he was quite integrated into this world. He very well knows what role greed, selfish interests, and fear is playing in this world. So, in my opinion, the problem is not only Russians who now the people are saying that they only elect the dictators. This is not the only problem. The problem is in the world at large. What do you think about it? There is some problem in the world today, and what is this problem?
Well, as I said before, the only problem is the competition. We are living in a very competitive world. Just to understand what does it mean, during the whole period of Cold War, there was no conflict between the West and Soviet Union, and no conflict between the West and China, simply because they did not compete. Yeah. The economic and social systems were so different that they could not compete. There was no common stage that would allow them to compete. Now this Cold War is broken and socialism is broken, and Russia and China became capitalist countries competing on the international global stage. We know what happened at the end, beginning of the 20th century, end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, as Germany and Italy began to compete with traditional Western powers, England, France, and then the USA, and then Japan began the same process. We know that this process of competition, or this, so to say, entering on the stage of competition, brought about many wars, that defended the 20th century. And now we have two new capitalist states, which is Russia and China. They entered the same stage. They are now in the same position in which Italy, Germany, and Japan were at the beginning of the 20th century. And it seems to me that consequences will be very similar. The only difference is, of course, that nuclear war became very dangerous. And because of that, you have this kind of permanent hesitation on all the sides to go into the real war. Something that if we would live in at the beginning of the 20th century, all these people would do immediately.
So, and the last question. In one of the interviews, which I read a couple of years ago, you mentioned that people have lost faith in the future and they look to the future with fear. So today, it can be said that the model of old, familiar world now is collapsing. If we will do interview maybe in 1 year, what will be the world when we will record this interview?
We don't know that. We don't know that, and that's precisely why people lose the interest in the future, because one has a feeling that the future is not manageable. Some people believe that big corporations like Google and I don't know, Meta and Microsoft are able to master the future, or Elon Musk, but it's of course complete nonsense. Future is an effect of some processes that we cannot control. We even don't know about these processes. It is difficult to say what the things will be like in a year. I think a lot of the developments depends on this war, how this war ends. In any case, I would say that in general, the world in 1 year will be like the world we are living now in. At the beginning of pandemic, people ask themselves, what will be the new world after pandemic? Of course, it will be like it was before. After this war, the world will like it was before. I mean, essentially, it will be the same technology. Essentially, it will be the same geopolitical structure, but probably some aspects of this geopolitical structure will be shifted. I think that Russia, whatever the outcome of this war, entered a long period of relative isolation from the outside world. So if Putin wanted to isolate Russia, and I think he wanted to isolate Russia, I think it was a goal of the war, then whatever will be outcome of this war, this main goal of the regime will be achieved, I think. Russia will be isolated for a long time. But this isolation of Russia will not change the general balance of power and the structure of the contemporary world politics.
So, Professor Groys, thank you for an interview.